All right, welcome to the first and best session of Mixology. Rather than crafting cocktails, we are going to be talking about crafting some unique go-to-market strategies. I've got Eric Iannello here today from Saleroom. I'm excited that you're here today. I wanted to kick it off. We're going to talk today about like the evolution of like the buyer and seller dynamics. I think these are big problems in the market today. I know Saleroom is going about it some very unique ways. Mixmax is as well. To our audience, this is not a conversation about our companies. This is gonna be a conversation about what is keeping everybody up at night. But I do want to kick it off, man, because I do think you guys are up to some pretty cool stuff over at Saleroom. So tell me a little bit about like yourself, your background, real quick, just to give us kind of a context and tell us a little bit about Saleroom.
Oh man, a background about me. I definitely cut into this a little bit more uniquely. I mean, not to say like it was anything out of the outlier, but like COVID, everything kind of shifted my priorities. And so I turned from kind of a B2C brick and mortar background with most of my background being physical therapy and selling stuff like that to B2B sales. And I strongly believe, biased or be it not, that is kind of what the deterring motion is in success today, right? And that's the varied background. That's the ability to get gritty. That's the ability to get witty and all the fun little things that we can get to that. So that's a little bit about me. I mean, I'm a redneck in a blue collar state working a white collar job, right? Like it's just such an outlier. But I think that's the applicability to kind of the nature of the beast to this current market, right? Like you kind of need that.
Yep.
That against the average Joe, average norm.
Man, I agree with that. Actually, I don't know about you, but like, especially from a hiring perspective, whenever I see people that come from unique backgrounds, that actually stands out to me more. Even more than that is like in the sales world, if you did door to door sales, you are already up there because I know you have no problem dealing with an objection. I know you have no problem getting on the phone and just talking to people. I did it. I don't know if you did it, man, but like that is like one of the hardest sales jobs I've ever had in my life. I had to do door to door B2B sales. Literally, I would get dropped off in the morning. And I learned like the postal service to where you always go left, so you don't you leave no leaf unturned. And I would walk into businesses and try to convince them to buy like computer paper and printers and stuff
That's
like that.
awesome. Yeah.
It was not awesome, but I learned a lot, man. A lot of like the core kind of fundamentals in sales I learned from that, and so I got nothing but respect for people that come from that type of background or even different diverse backgrounds like yourself, man. So
Yeah.
tell me a little about Saleroom.
Sales room, man. Yes. As you can tell by the spike in my voice, man, I'm excited about this. So I've been with them for, gosh, I don't even know, 10 months. So basically a decade in sales careers. But the narrative is so compelling. And this is what kind of captivated my attention to them originally. Right? It's the common nature, let's put it in the common norm is individual or sales individual has conversation with buyer, right? Be it virtual. They would record it and then go after the call to a collaboration party or leadership to try to either course correct, replicate, or just to build and figure out what to do next. But the market isn't what the same as it was 18 to 24 months ago, right? I think there's no argument there. So why are we still abiding by the same rules and regulations as we did in the yesteryears? So the narrative is that isn't applicable today. So we at Saleroom, I say we, I am by far the least intellectual person when it comes to the room of engineers to this, but they built an amazing platform giving real-time insights, real-time data, and deep analytics into what is happening during the buying conversation, or should I say the sales conversation. And it just gives you live feedback to execute on in real time.
Dude, I love that.
It's monumental.
I think one of the biggest opportunities in the market going along with the dynamic shift, and I'm sure we're going to uncover quite a bit of that in today's conversation. But I do think that a lot of companies, specifically around like the sales process or sales engagement, they either focus on two areas, and I think there's one area that's the big gap, and I think Saleroom is also helping solve that. It's either like, how do we help you prospect, right? Plain and simple, like spray and pray. How do we help you automate stuff? Blah, blah, blah. Then it's all around like deal intelligence. How do we actually help make sure that you can manage that deal? But there's so much that goes in between of like actually setting up that deal and actually booking that meeting And I think like it's been overlooked for so long because of that old mentality. You know, I come from Uber, but we started it in the wrong way, whereas like grow at all cost. And the mentality was just like, go find a new customer, just go find another one. Where now it is very much about when you do find the right customer, how do you make sure that you're having the right conversation, focusing on the right areas? And so I'm curious, man, like, what are some of the things that y'all have learned? And, you know, obviously there's so much data that y'all are able to digest. What are y'all learning of like what are some of the biggest gaps in the market when it actually comes to having those meaningful conversations?
How long do we have on this session? No, it's interesting, and I think, and again, I'll probably use this term 15 times over again, but the common narrative, right? Let's talk about the common nomenclatures. It's that people assume that sales is linear, right? It's also to the point of like Mixmax, right? Like you guys point out that top of funnel curation and progress or pipeline progression is not a pass fail kind of situation, right? It's a progressional kind of snowball effect, right? Let's use an analogy that we all know. There takes a lot of different variables. Sometimes it's 3 steps forward, it takes 5 steps back. It's and I said that backwards, but you get the idea of it.
Yeah.
It's not a linear process. And so what people are doing is they're taking the script, right? Like here's the success criteria that you need to abide by in order to get this deal to a close one situation. It's like, hey, Stuart, dude, it's not 1996 when Medic was written. What I need to have is applicable value between stage 1 to stage 2 progression, the reason why, how to take it in this kind of context, and what makes this buying persona, this buying party, this person on the other side, what makes them unique and tick, right? And how can I capitalize on that? Again, to a long-winded, very tangent-bound answer, it's progression, not perfection.
Yep. I like that. And so along with that progression, right, when you like, let's take a step back and just look at the general landscape, man. Not talking about our companies, but like, what do you think is the biggest problem in the market today, or one of the biggest challenges for sellers, like actually having genuine connections with buyers compared to, let's say, I'm not even going to go 5 years ago. I'm going to just go 2 years ago because like a lot has happened in the past 2 years.
So this is where maybe biased, and I'll probably have people challenge me on this, which I welcome, and I love this. This is the point of the conversation I love. I think people looked at sales as a transaction, which it is, right? Like obviously, if the end goal is to make money, to generate money, revenue, whatever, but they choose the journey as a transactional journey. I need to get to step B, and what I need to do is this criteria, this checklist, right? Everybody knows MEDIC or this checklist in order to make this deal a solid one. What I think got lost in the void is this human connection, right? Actually having the genuine conversation. They call it building rapport, but I look at it as more of like building a partnership, right, with the individual. And this is coming back to our first point of a varied background, right? So I bartended for years, right? That was my college heyday, and I was really good at it because I would enjoy conversing with people. I loved having conversations with people. It's the same application to my conversations today. I get down to the criteria that I need to get to, like obviously the pain points, the eluding progressions, the whatever you need. But I do it in a manner that we're sitting around having a beer. And people, and again, this is by no means a persona based, this is by no means a personality. It's just they think of it as this step 1 to step 2. Let me get to step 15 in order. And it's like, you guys are losing out. Mm-hmm. It's that cheesy quote that I always see on people's doors. It's not about the destination. It's always about the journey. Like, dude,
hey,
man, apply that
to hanging up sales. In my living room. No, I'm joking.
Oh, I know. But the point of the matter is, it's having the conversation, building rapport. And like when I found myself upside down in between jobs, you know who actually came to my rescue, right? And we'll call it that. But like, who knocked on my door? My previous customers that I built rapport with, that I built a relationship with, because they remembered that experience, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't about the transaction of the product that they received and bought. It was about the journey that we took them through, about the relationship that we built.
Man, that is like, I always tell every single rep I ever work with, I'm just like, referrals is your best pipeline. Like, and when you actually know how to build your network, yeah, it's game changer. And if you actually like, I don't know about you, but every time I've looked at like who's my top rep, that is the number one thing that they have. If they have that network of referrals. And I think you actually hit a really good one. Like I call it like, we got to get back to humanizing sales. Like the game of like call scripts and like, hey, you need to make sure when we talk about medic, like it drives me crazy when sales leaders do this. And they're like, in order for it to go to the next stage of the deal, you have to make sure that the M, the E, and the D are completed. And it's like, that's not how this works. Like, there is no checklist that goes along with this, man. It's crazy.
Love I love having conversations with my reps or like my team or like even them like doing a pulse check on me of like why is this deal in this position, right? In stage two,
Mhm.
right? And they go through, well, they have certain criteria, I've uncovered this, I've gotten to the economic buyer, they haven't involved. And I was like, great, tell me why. Like tell me, give me some
What's
gut
the
feeling, right?
problem that we're solving? And then you get this just like blank stare.
But you know what I think really, and this is going back to my first point, not to elaborate this topic, but it's such an important topic. It's the differentiator between successful people and not in the latter, let's call it that, in this market is because those who are up here, let's call them this top 5%, understand who they are as a seller, right? And they can connect that because they understand not just the strengths of like, oh, I'm really good at cold calling. Well, why? Well, I'm good at handling objections. No, you're good at conversing with people. Like you're understanding, certain criterias within people when they pivot left. How can we capitalize on that? Right?
Yep.
Or you're really good at negotiating because you're not scared of money because of the way that there's so many underlying factors that when you actually discover those 5, 10, 15 different school or tool traits, watch out, Susan, man, like the world's your oyster at that point.
I always love your your names. You got Stuart and we got Susan joining the party today.
Shout out to
All
the
right.
Stuart and Susans.
So you make a great point around like the humanization of cells. And so one question I have for you is like what what are I hate the word tactics because it also again
Yeah.
makes it sound so transactional, but like what are some of your methods that you use to actually break through the noise? Right? Because I think that's also part of the problem is like you can be great at building those meaningful connections, but the problem is that that voice is it's overshadowed by all the like the trash that's out there. So like what have you done? Like anything out of the box, anything creative?
See my LinkedIn platform lately?
I do love your LinkedIn, man. I love it.
How I still get deals, I have no idea. I about 5 years ago, or excuse me, about 4 years ago, when I moved into the actual startup, like the nitty gritty early stage, like the ones where you lose sleep and you think about alcoholism. I think the real underlying factor, what made certain companies successful, was that their understanding of their ICP, right? Who are they talking to? Why are they talking to them? How do they talk? What do they walk? What makes them breathe in the morning? Right? And you want to understand that so that way, one, you can connect to them on a human level. Two, you can actually appreciate and transmit that message. And three, that you understand at the end of the day, are we actually getting to a progressive motion, right? Be it a transaction or not, right? I want to make sure that I'm in a forward motion. That doesn't happen without understanding your market, your ICP, your total addressable market, whatever you want to, all the acronyms that we know and love and die by. But the more so like, who am I as a seller and how can I match the two synergies? And so I know myself, right? I target sales persona, sales ICP, GTM ICP. Most of us are people person, right? We can kind of categorize it for a generalized idea that a type A persona, of course, for a
Yep.
generalized aspect for this conversation, let's say. I use humor and I'm blunt, I'm rash, I'm blunt, if I may say, in some aspect of things, because that's not what many people do today in our
Yep.
world, right? And so where I see people going in a straight and narrow line, I'm going, hey, this is fun. This is fun. This is fun. Shoot. They're like, oops, I went too far. Okay, my bad. I'm coming back. Like, and that's the idea between my platform, my outreach, my conversations with my current prospects to my current customers to businesses to individuals like yourself. Like that's just who I am.
I feel like you wake up in the morning and it's like you see this line and you're just like, I'm just gonna jump across it and see how much I can do before
It's like
somebody
this, like, like kids going, it's like, yeah, exactly. Towing the line
man.
as they call it.
Oh man, this always happens when we get together because we start talking about something, I start laughing, and I'm just like, crap, I forgot what I was gonna ask about.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is what preparation looks like.
This is what preparation looks like. Man, no, it was like a sidebar thought. I got plenty of questions for you,
No, I know.
but it was a sidebar thought, and if it comes back to me, I'll get there. So I'm curious, let's say you can cut through that noise. Actually, here we go.
Love it.
Ladies and gentlemen, my brain works now. Man, I think the other side of it too is when we talk about like cutting through the noise, the other thing that I feel like most of us don't do, and we need to check ourselves and get back to reality, is to your point, and I was hoping you were going to say it about, I'm going to let you say it. I'm just going to say facts and I'll let you go through it. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, you can take it and run with
No,
it.
you take it. You came up
It's all
with
about
it.
the facts, the cracks, and the impacts.
Boom. There we go. So I think even though like you might be able to do that well, I think the other side that we need to understand is like, where is our buyer actually at in their journey? And what I mean by that is like email number one does a great job of actually like doing all of those. And then immediately like, hey, let's get on a call. And it's like, bro, I don't know you. Like that's not where we're
I knew
at in
that
this
you're in first.
relationship. Exactly. Like maybe ask me if I actually relate with this or like, what I'm doing to maybe solve this problem. And it all comes down back to bad enablement is the sad part, right? Is because
Yeah.
we, and I say we as revenue leaders is like we drive the behavior. We're just like get a meeting, booked meetings, pipeline. And I feel like if we focus a little bit less on that and more on the process of like how do we actually make sure that we're meeting our buyers where our buyers are at, man, the pipeline will flow. Like that I believe in.
Okay.
I see a lot of head nodding. Go
Oh
ahead.
man, this is my area. This is my sandbox. But I also get a
Take
little too
it.
brash on this, so keep me honest here. But I think okay, so now this is where we may get a little tangent. So keep me in line in here. Predictive revenue is broken, right? It was a sustainable model until it wasn't, and it was a pass-fail idea, right? You can bet your base model off of revenue production on a 30% conversion, be it pipeline to, or I'm sorry, meetings to pipeline, from pipeline to revenue, from revenue to churn. Like it was a 30% substantial rule throughout that entire customer journey.
Yep.
What we're realizing is that that's because it was a seller's journey. We controlled the narrative. We can control for the most part because most people were in a buying motion. But now, hey, welcome 2024, is that 3%, right? Now we're reduced down to a 3% actual average of the people out there being in a buying motion, 7% in awareness, and the rest of it, they don't give a flying. I'll edit myself on that one.
I got it. Yeah. You caught yourself.
But people are still in this idea of going, ooh la la, look at what I've got here. This is the coolest thing since sliced bread. Buy it. And you're like, I don't need a water bottle, but okay, keep on going. And they're just shoveling this down. And what it leads to is bloated pipeline, mass revenue, obviously, skewed forecasting and projections, and then missed earnings. Let's look at Salesforce, for example. Sorry to call you out, Salesforce, but you're a pretty public figure. They've went from, in the last 5 years, from a profit rule of 32% year over year down to 8%. Why is that? Because they're in an assumption that everyone's in a buying motion because everyone needs Salesforce. Well, welcome to the new world where CRMs aren't the central source of truth anymore, right? And so with that idea, right, it's still the idea that people are like, hey, you heard my name. You're going to capture the demand. Like, well, not necessarily. Susan and Stuart are over there actually teaching and engaging and actually talking my language. So I'm going to go over there, right?
Yep.
So I'll pause for a second.
I love that you talked about predictable revenue. I agree. That is it's a model that's broken. It's not about predictable revenue. I like to call it predictable impact, right? Like that's what we should be focusing on. And what I mean by that is because when you provide recurring impact, that's where value is unlocked. And so you can even take that to the top of the funnel where it's like predictable impact. How are you actually impacting this conversation? How are you actually impacting that deal? We can actually control that, right? Am I actually talking about things that you care about? Am I actually talking about things that you're trying to solve for? And am I actually kind of like getting to those impact areas? And then my software better do that as well if I want to keep you as a customer. And so I think you hit
even the relationship that you're building, right?
Yeah.
Because exactly. The timing, right? Like you can touch on timing, right?
Yep.
Oh, you left a good enough impression that right now it may not be savvy, but 6 months. Hey, remember that conversation we had with, with Heath or with Eric? Like, that's the impact that you should be driving on your outbound messaging. The booking a meeting is the caveat. Like that's just, and again, it's because this idea that it's a pass-fail motion, right? If I don't get the meeting, I failed. Yeah. And it's so freaking antiquated. And even then it was still like this can't be right, but I'm going to keep on doing it until it stops working. Yeah. But like, we all knew that wasn't right, And so this idea that's come today, man, it's like, I cannot preach this anymore. I encourage my team to go out and find me value. I will pay on value that you uncover, be it who the economic buyer is. what platform do they use? What's
Yep.
their buying journey, or excuse me, buying cycle like? Give me all of that, build up the case study, because when I go to the ponies above, I got all the carrots that they want.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can step back by going, this is going to be a tier 2 ICP. They're not in our tier 1 right now. Let's actually adjust and you know what I
That's
mean?
a
Like,
whole nother conversation about like prioritizing our own time and our own value. That doesn't
imagine.
happen enough in this world of sales.
Let me call them 1,500 more times on my parallel dialer, because I know
I
I know
think
the
there's a 1%
janitor's got the
chance.
idea. Like, what?
Hey, they told
What?
me they're not in the buying window. They're not talking about this for 6 months, but you know what? I'm gonna keep calling them every 3 days.
But I got a meeting. That means that Lord
All right.
Almighty.
Man, this has been a good one. We've talked about, and I love it, the shift of the environment, about humanizing the conversation, about cutting through the noise. So let's kind of compound on that is like with us now being in this virtual and remote environment, I do think that it also changes the way that you go about engaging because I'm sure for you, like when you talk to people face to face, like it's a totally different kind of relationship in the way that it kicks off. So like given that shift to a more digital world, how do you think sales team can like maintain that personal touch that actually makes those sales interactions more engaging and more human? And let's use that sinful word that doesn't happen in sales, but like how do we make it fun?
Or that, or the other F word. Yeah, that's a great question. This is where it becomes almost like a method in the madness, right? Where you kind of have to sit there and read it, get your message, your tone, and scripture. Like, okay, let me use an example. Like when I give coaching to somebody in a cold calling, I usually typically have them record themselves and watch their body mannerisms. Because again, it's not what I say, but it's how I'm saying it, right? It's also like I'm a very, as you can see, like an extroverted kind of person, right? Let me make sure I'm capitalizing on that, and I'm sitting here reading it word for word because people will pick up on it. So again, it's understanding yourself as the buyer, or excuse me, as the seller, understanding the buyer in the sense that you want to make sure that you're matching their tone. But most importantly, at the end of the day, are you being you? Like, are you just kind of doing the motion to do the motion, right? Like,
Yep.
I
Yep.
think so many sellers are finding themselves with their shoes untied because they don't realize what they're actually doing, because they followed a motion that was written for them. They followed a process that was written for them. And they're like, over this way? Okay, cool. Now what? And you're like, did you even look down scope? Did you understand what you were trying to hit at the same time? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Like, that's a redneck analogy. But again, my point being, though, they didn't understand what they were doing throughout that process. Right. And
Yep.
so going back to understanding who you are, tonality, the person,
No,
everything,
I
man.
love that because you can easily see that too, right? Especially with this whole concept around like personalization and show me, you know me. People do a great job of like putting those words together, but like I call it bar talk, right?
Yeah.
Like when I read something that, if I'm to your point, coaching, if I'm reading like an email that they're putting together, a LinkedIn message, and I just question them like two things I do is actually Eli 5, explain it like I'm 5.
Yeah.
Remove the jargon, remove the buzzwords, like, and then number two, like the second piece is like bar talk. Like, are you really like if me and you are having a beer together, are we really gonna be using all these big words and like trying to
Yeah.
sound intelligent and smart? Like, no. And guess what? The person on the other end actually doesn't want to hear that either. Like they just want to have a normal conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
I joke that there's only 2 times in the day that people read their email. One, when they're doing the business in the morning, when you're catching them with their pants down, which they're not going to be listening to those kind of fun jargons. And 2, when they're shutting down their laptop, captivate
Yeah.
their attention. Right?
Yep. Yep. That's actually another good one. This is we're gonna take a quick detour, but I've noticed that you've talked a lot about it, and that's prospecting on the weekends.
Hell yeah.
Tell me more.
That's my shit. Sorry for the cursing. Yeah, I'm a big believer, man. 2, you can control a lot of situations. People are like, oh, respect their privacy. They have control of that, right?
Yep.
I'm not banging on their door. I'm not kicking it down. I'm not looking through their window, seeing what they like for lunch. Like, I'm not doing those kind of things. But what I'm doing is I can go and check multiple channels and get to them when they're quiet. I'll send out a tailored email that I could sit there. You could tell that I misspelled that word, that I'm actually looking at your Instagram, and that I'm not sitting there going through and going AI, 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 AI. Because at the end of the day, right, like it's almost now to necessity. But yes, I'm a big believer in prospecting on the weekends. Why? Because nobody else does it. So why
That's
don't
true.
I generate
That's true.
60%, man. I have the facts all behind me and I love it. I get a lot of good messaging. If they tell me to kick rocks, then guess what? They weren't going to be an applicable prospect in the first place.
Yep. No, I agree with that. So I appreciate that because I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that should hear that. Because I think like part of this shift is we put this taboo around like working on the weekends. And my personal mentality is like, I don't care when you work. Like, that's the beauty of sales. You've got a target. If whatever
Yeah.
you like, whatever works for you to hit that
Yeah.
target, like that's what I care about. I don't care if you made 50 calls on a Saturday or you've made 50 calls on a Monday. Like at the end of the day, like what I care about is the results, and you do you, boo boo, of however you want to get those results.
It's true, man. I give parameters in the sense of best practice, right? Like, I
Yep,
wouldn't suggest you
exactly.
coming up and like knocking on their door, or I used to joke like giving them a cup of Joe after they wake up from the chloroform-induced coma that you put them in. Like, I don't think those are best practices, but you
Yeah,
can certainly stand out from the noise from a
yeah,
tactical approach, right? DMs, right? Like, I've built up my network to the point that I'm like, hey, if I shoot it, they look at it, they're going, okay, this guy clearly isn't freaking of sales. I don't have helping X in my headline. It opens up doors. I did that from a tactical approach, right? I'm sending
yep.
an email because I know Stuart from 12 to 1 has probably got a beer in his hand watching football the same as I. So if you want to have a conversation, hit me back up, dude. Like, I'm,
Yep.
I'm ready for it, right? Like, that's just the idea that I'm transmitting, and I think it's captivated in my message, or
All
received,
right.
I should say.
Love that. So I got one more question for you before we wrap it up for today. So you talked about the bad enablement and the bad coaching and how a lot of reps have learned bad behaviors, which I completely agree with. How, and I'm sure you probably get this look when you're coaching your reps now about being more human, being more authentic, being more empathetic. And it's like these new words that like a lot of times they've never heard. And so like what are some of the things that you do about going about coaching and encouraging your reps to like be more authentic in their execution, be more human, in their engagement, especially knowing that sales is still a high pressure environment,
Yeah.
right? So like what are some of the things that have worked for you to actually help rebuild and change some of those bad behaviors that have been instilled earlier on?
My two favorite exercises, and I don't think we've actually talked about this yet, so this may be fun.
Okay.
I call it stop, drop, go. And it's basically we have a conversation. Anytime you bring up a buzzword, I say stop, drop, and start from the beginning, right? It's kind of the same idea. I did it back in physical therapy
Yeah.
for those who don't know, I used to help train vets, and that was what we would do, right? Stop, drop, give me some, and then go back to the beginning. So when we go through a cold calling script, right, or something like that, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, as soon as I say something smart and real cute, like I'll say stop, go back to the beginning, and then they'll catch themselves preemptively or like proactively of like, oh, I don't need to say API because that's like, let's talk about connections. Like, that's, again, it's the terminology and the simplicity in the language. The second one is I have them write my son emails. I don't actually deliver it to him, but I want
Yeah.
them to transmit it because he's 3. Not that he could
Love
read,
that.
but my point is though, it's like you guys have to write me a full cadence as if you're directed to my 3-year-old son.
Yep.
And they have to do that. I shouldn't say like I'm not a dictator, but like they're very much encouraged to do it, right? To the point that they have to get down the language between the spacing, the language, the terms, the verbs, right? And at the same time, is the CTA, like this is where everyone gets tripped up, right? Is the CTA clear enough? Or am I delivering the value, in which case my 3-year-old son will actually say, like, heck yeah, they got a Lego with my name on it. Call me Stuart, right? Like, that's the idea behind it. So again,
Yep.
those are 2 practices, and it's so applicable between your customer conversations, your cold call outreach, the way that you network, the way that you converse with you and I, because
Yep.
at the end of the day, just simplify your stuff.
It goes back. No, I agree. It's the Eli 5 that I always tell my
Yeah.
reps. And I'm like, explain it like I'm 5. Because I think to your point, well, one question, does your son actually have an email address already?
No, that kid doesn't even have an iPad. He has more fun with a blade of grass than he does with a remote.
But the second part behind that too is I believe if you cannot break down what you're trying to convey in the most simplistic terms, do you really understand what you're actually talking about? Have you really done enough of like your due diligence and research to be able to speak to it? My answer is no, because if you can't break it down in simple terms, you probably don't actually understand what you're talking about.
I actually agree and take it one step further that the more insecure reps talk the bigger game, right? It's like the dog who has the loudest bark.
Yeah,
I
agree.
And the
All
ones
right,
who are
man.
quiet are the ones you got to watch out for. So yeah, I'll wrap it up on that.
I know we're at time, and so what if like me, I don't pay attention that far, or at least my attention span's not that long. So for anybody that only catches the last 30 seconds of today's session, what are some things that they should take away with that they can actually take into the real world?
Find out who you are as a seller before you find out who you're selling to. I'd say that hand over fist. That's your applicable value, no matter what vertical, what product, where you are in life. But find out who you are as a seller.
All right, looks like I got 29 minutes and 45 seconds of editing to do, just because everything was just summarized in that one statement, man. Man, I know you're busy. I know you guys got a lot going on, so I really appreciate the time today. Absolutely enjoyed this session, man.
I mean, it can only go up from here, right? So the next couple episodes are going to be.
There we go.
You start with the lowest on the totem pole. No, it's always good, brother.
All right, man. You take care. Thanks for coming.
All right, buddy.